Thank you, Mr. Cornell, for agreeing and finding time in your busy schedule.
Thank you.
First, let me start with the most recent story, the famous intercepted telephone conversation between the high-level American diplomat and the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine with the F word. What do you think, what kind of effect it might have on the EU-US relations?
Well, unfortunately, Assistant Secretary Nuland came to her job with the idea of starting a transatlantic renaissance. This might make it difficult for her to continue with that task. Obviously, it was a very unfortunate situation, and it suggests that the American diplomats have not learned the lessons of WikiLeaks. But I think already, because of various NSA scandals and so on, the transatlantic relationship was already quite bad. And unfortunately, this means that we still have a bad prospects for improved transatlantic coordination on issues affecting this region, which is very much necessary.
Thanks a lot. Talking about the future of transatlantic cooperation, well, we hear lots of criticism towards the EU, sometimes fair criticism, that this is a big bureaucracy, moving very slowly to resolve the issue, not very enthusiastic to resolve the issues in the region. But what about the Obama administration?
Well, I think that's interesting that you mentioned that, because it's kind of surprising that right now that the American administration is disparaging towards the EU, because 5 or 10 years ago I could have understood it when the EU was very disorganized. But in the past 2 years, if anything, the EU has been the force that has been coming up and standing up against Russian reintegration of the former Soviet space, at least in Eastern Europe, whereas the Obama administration has been very passive. So I think the Obama administration has shown some indications of trying to take this region more seriously, but still we're dealing with a situation where most people in Russia have understood, perhaps wrongly, that the US has accepted the notion of a sphere of influence. So we're below zero, if you will, and the Obama administration has to dig itself up again.
Well, Germany has been kind of the major problem in transatlantic cooperation. Very recently, and I quote, German foreign ministry official has said that the EU was wrong not to have analyzed possible conflicts with Russia before offering the so-called Eastern Partnership to countries like Ukraine. Gernot Erler, Germany's new chief foreign relations with Russia, has said. The thing is that we remember 2008 when Germany was very reluctant to offer MAP, and they succeeded in that, not to Ukraine and Georgia, not to upset Russia. They were saying that, well, NATO is the military alliance, so there is a ground for Russia to be irritated. But now we're talking about the association agreement, and we hear the same remarks from Germany. So what does it say? What's your take on that?
Well, it suggests that he's right in the sense that Europe did not foresee that such an innocuous thing as the association agreement and a free trade area would elicit exactly the same kind of response from Russia as a NATO enlargement would. And I think that's because the Russians did not realize until recently what the EU was about. They saw the EU as some harmless thing because they used to think in terms of hard security and military security. But it seems that Russian thinking has progressed and sees the EU perhaps as a bigger threat than NATO. And the Europeans were not ready for this, and the Europeans conceptually could not handle this.
Do you think Germany, by making such a remark, somehow is admitting the existence of spheres of influence that, the West was rejecting?
Well, you see, this is domestic German politics. On the one hand, you have Chancellor Merkel in November making a very big speech in which she strongly spoke out about the rights of nations for their own foreign policy choice, the unacceptability of third-party intervention, directly talking, obviously meaning Russia. So you have very different opinions within the coalition, and it seems to me that they're now jockeying for a position about how this policy towards Russia and towards the Eastern Partnership will develop, and it's still very unclear. Unfortunately, it means that Germany will be at most a very conflicted actor.
Well, now, coming to Georgia, we have a big chance of signing the association agreement, sometime in several months. Georgian government insists that until the association agreement is signed, we should expect the provocations from Russia. Why not until it's signed? When not after this is signed? What is the association agreement? Is this it's not some sort of a security?
Well, I think it's about that from a Russian perspective. When does the European integration process become inevitable? And maybe it depends on their interpretation more than ours, unfortunately, and we don't know exactly what their interpretation is. If their interpretation is that after having signed this agreement, Georgia irrevocably goes to the West, then yes, then they will try to prevent it. Or they will simply try to, maybe they will consider that it's possible to create some trouble for the implementation rather than for the signing. So I think both before and after we're likely to see some Russian provocations and interventions.
What is the EU's perception of the association agreement?
The EU, unfortunately, very much has a too technical understanding of this issue that hasn't factored in geopolitics, and especially has no answer to the Russian provocations related to the unresolved conflicts, which is the main title.
And my last question, I know your time is limited, it's about the NATO summit in 2014 in London. Like during Chicago summit, Secretary of State like Hillary Clinton has said that the next summit should be an enlargement summit. Do you expect any sort of steps in that direction?
I think very few people right now want it to be an enlargement summit. I think for Georgia the key point will be to first of all decide what Georgia wants, and secondly, already today, preferably yesterday, to develop a strategy, an active strategy of reaching out and coordinating with its friends, both in the public officials and in the non-governmental sector, to try to promote a consensus.
Do you think Georgia is doing enough in that?
I think they're not doing enough right now. I think the government has to be more coordinated, has to be more assertive, and has to put out clearly what it is Georgia wants.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.